We're here tonight to celebrate the release of NOSH with author Micah Siva. We also have a lovely moderator that we're able to make happen in the last minute, so I'd love for you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you.
Absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, good. If you can't hear me, start waving your hands wildly around. There you go. All right, better? Good. I was just mentioning to Mike, I've had various mishaps with mics, but bear with me. So my name is Jessie Sierra Ross. I am a cookbook author of Seasons Around the Table, which will be coming out this fall. And I am a food blogger, a TV and home entertaining expert, and lover of all things butter and sugar and cocktails. And I run the blog Straight to the Hips Baby. And I am also a proud Jewess. And so when I was asked to come and help moderate this discussion, I absolutely hopped on board, ran into Boston, and said yes. And after looking at Micah's book, you are going to love this. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. All right, Micah Siva is a trained chef, registered dietitian, recipe writer, and food photographer specializing in modern Jewish cuisine. After graduating from the National Gourmet Institute of Health and Culinary Arts, she pursued a career in nutrition and later worked for global brands, media outlets, and publications in food media. She shares Jewish-inspired plant-forward recipes through her blog, NOSH with Micah. NOSH, plant-forward recipes celebrating modern Jewish cuisine, is for anyone who wants to connect with Jewish culinary history while following a plant-based diet. NOSH offers more than 80 recipes that can be served at Shabbat, holidays, or even better, every day. Food is a central part of Jewish culture, and those who don't connect with the foods of yesterday may feel as though part of their heritage is missing. With the rise of plant-based eating across the globe, NOSH is the ideal guide for those looking to connect with and share their Judaism in a way that feels authentic to today. Here to tell us more are Micah and our lovely moderator.
I'm just sitting up very straight.
Even if I sit up straight, still can't see.
Well, first of all, welcome. We're so happy that you're here this evening to learn more about NOSH, and I am excited because I had the pleasure of having a long lunch with Micah today and her lovely husband and beautiful little baby boy, and everything that I learned, I can't wait for you to learn. So, Micah, I want you to tell us more about the stories and inspiration behind NOSH.
So NOSH has been the book that I've wanted since I was a kid. When I was 12, much to the disappointment of my Jewish mother, I told her I wanted to be vegetarian, and like any Jewish mother, she freaked out. She didn't know what to do. So luckily, my 3rd grade Hebrew school teacher, Rory Hornstein, was also a dietitian, and so she came to our house and taught us about eating vegetarian food. And it was at that point where I was then responsible for making my own dinners because my mom's not going to cook for two separate dishes every night. And I started to eat vegetarian food, and when I would go to my family's for holidays, there was never anything I could eat unless I brought it myself. And back to my good Jewish mother, I had a nice Jewish bubby who didn't understand what was going on. I just had side iceberg salads until I brought my own food and had to tell her that, no, like chicken's still meat, even a little is still like not really what I want. And I always felt a little left out during the Jewish holidays because I just couldn't eat what everyone else was, and food's been such an important part of my upbringing, and I'm sure for many, food is how you connect with your family and holidays and customs, whether you're Jewish or not. And I wish that I had the opportunity to share this book with my family when I was a new vegetarian as a 12-year-old girl. And that's where NOSH, the cookbook, came from, because it's something I wish existed for me when I was younger, and it's something that now I can give to my mom and be like, this is what you make me for holidays. And she won't have to ask me, and I won't have to make her for holiday dinner. So that's where it came from.
I love that. Speaking of family, I mean, I think Jewish cuisine, food is love. It's the most basic form of comfort, of affection. And I know in the book you've spoken about your grandmothers, Eva and Muriel, and in particular, Muriel's sweet treats, her mandelbread, or mandelbrot. And I was curious, how did these two, they sound amazing, amazing women inspire you and really help to nurture your love of food?
So I'll start by saying that my Bubby Muriel, the only thing she can make is mandelbread. That's the only thing she can make, and sometimes lemon bars, but last time she made them, she put rice instead of coconut in them, and she's never made them again. So that's the one recipe that I was like, I can't not put anything in there for her, because she will have the book and will disown me if I don't pay homage to her mandelbread, which we called kamish. I don't know if that's just a Western Canadian thing or not, if you couldn't tell by my accent, I'm Canadian. But my grandmother Eva, and of course I needed to balance them both in the book because grandmothers, was really such a huge inspiration in my life. And when I was younger, my sister and I would go visit my grandmother, who was living in Vancouver, for 10 days every summer, just the two of us. My sister would go visit our grandparents and have camp grandma and grandpa. And of course, what are you supposed to do with your grandkids for 10 days in the summer? So we'd be put in tennis lessons. I was never very good, but my sister was, so I was taken out of tennis lessons and hung out with my grandma. And we would go picking raspberries, and then we'd go home and make jam out of the raspberries, then we'd make thimble or thumbprint cookies and use our jam to put inside, and we'd make pies together and schnitzel and chicken soup, and everything was homemade, and that's really how she showed her love for us. And it was always about food and eating together with my grandmother. And one of my favorite recipes in the book is a recipe for kreplach, which is like a little soup dumpling, and she would make them every year for the Jewish New Year. And when I first brought my husband Josh to meet my grandmother in Canada, she was starting to decline at that time, but it was really important that we learned together how to make kreplach with Josh and her, so we could have that memory of making kreplach together. And when she passed in 2018, Josh and I were living in the UK, and she passed away right before the Jewish New Year. And so in Jewish custom, you have to be buried within a certain number of hours and not on a holiday. And so we couldn't make it back to her funeral. So I personally coped by making kreplach all day and just folding them and remembering her, because when I first decided to go to culinary school, I actually was in university or college at that time and decided to drop out and go to culinary school. Again, I'm a very impulsive person. And when I told my parents, they were a little iffy about it. When I told anyone else, they were questioning my decisions, but she looked at me and she said, "Go be sexy." And I was like, "You got it, Grandma." She was really sassy and just such a firecracker. And this book is really, if we're being honest, it's for her.
That's an amazing story, and it's when I think, in Judaism, we're always aiming to remember our past, our loved ones. We name our children after our dearly departed family, and in a way, when we cook our relatives' recipes, we're keeping that spirit and memory alive. So I really love that answer. I do that with challah bread. My mother has passed away, but I make her challah bread every Friday morning, and that's how I keep that in my family. Going through food culture, particularly Jewish food culture, we have a love for Asian food cultures, Indian food cultures, South American. They all have very strong, traditional, and well-documented food cultures. What makes traditional Jewish food that significant and that meaningful to you? Let's say more on the cerebral side.
So
I stumped her.
I wasn't sure where you were going with that one. That wasn't on the list. We'll get someone from the audience. So I think when it comes to Jewish food, it really helps to tell a story of where we've come from and where we're going in a lot of ways. And in in NOSH, it's not just Ashkenazi food, it's not just a veganized deli book. It tries to tell the story of where Jewish people have had to go, typically because they're being persecuted from somewhere else, and how they adapt to traditions and ingredients and foods from those places to fit within their table. And I think that that's what's so special about Jewish food and Jewish cuisine, is that it tells such a big story, and it's such a diverse food. It's such a diverse cuisine because Jewish people are so diverse, and they've been put into all corners of the world, whether they want to be there or not, and they've had to adapt. And I think that that's what I've tried to tell in NOSH. And I come from an Ashkenazi family. My family's Ukrainian, like yours. We bonded over that. But my husband comes from a Sephardic family, so his family has Turkish roots. And we've been able to meld our cultures and cuisines together into our nuclear family and grow upon that as well. So it takes a little bit of every aspect in there, or tries to. And of course, when it comes to Passover, being a Sephardic is a lot easier because you can eat a lot more things. So that was one thing that I was happy to take on of his when we got married.
I'm very jealous.
It
So
could be why I married him.
That's a very strong reason.
Yeah, it's great.
That's wonderful. Now, another off question. We talk about meaningfulness in our cooking and our recipes. Is there a certain dish that is particularly meaningful and heartfelt to you that could be included in the book or not from your family?
I would say the krepla is the main one, and then another one that's obviously not true to form of what I grew up with is the gefilte fish. So I grew up with gefilte fish never in a can or in a jar. It was always homemade. I was very lucky, and it was actually delicious. Where my grandmother and my mom spent years trying to replicate my great-grandmother Frida's gefilte fish recipe. And she was a fur trader for the Hudson's Bay. She was a really cool woman. And she had this gefilte fish recipe. And every year my mom and grandma would fly fishing from northern Saskatchewan, so like the prairies, middle of nowhere, never go there, please. And they would taste it raw and try to figure out all of these spices and seasonings. And it was such a process and bonding moment for the family to have this gefilte fish, and it was so special that I knew that I needed to have a gefilte fish replacement in the book. And so I took inspiration from what I remembered their gefilte fish tasting like, with just a little bit of sweetness, obviously the carrot on top, because if it's not topped with the carrot, it's not a gefilte fish. But I think that that's another recipe that felt special, where gefilte fish is just so special in our family, and I wanted to have a reasonable replacement. And at the end of the day, it's honestly a vegetable patty that's kosher for Passover with some nori in there. But to me, it reminds me of gefilte fish.
I love that, and I really appreciate the sleuthing, because so many of our grandmothers, our grandfathers, our great-grandparents, they measured by handfuls, and they got a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and so to recreate the flavor profile, that's what I really loved about this book, because I don't have to do it now. I can just go to the book. So we're going to circle back to, the book is plant-based, it's plant-forward, and I'm curious because Jewish food can be very heavy. It can be very much protein-forward, fatty, and it's delicious, but it certainly is not plant-based necessarily. So I'm curious, what sparked your commitment to rethinking Jewish food through a plant-based and also health-supported way?
So I would say that most Ashkenazi food is meat-heavy. Like we have our corned beef, our pastrami, and brisket and everything in between. But when we start looking at other areas of Jewish cuisine, we start to see more vegetarian or plant-based options. And at the same time, if you're having like a meat meal and you're not having dairy, you're already likely having a vegan side. If you're having something without dairy, there might be eggs in there. Or if you're having a milk meal, so when we're not having meat, many of those dishes are already vegetarian, so you're already doing it for a lot of the meals that you're having. And it felt important, because I felt like I was missing out on some of the memories and food memories that I had growing up. For example, like a pastrami or a brisket or chicken soup or any of those more meat or gefilte fish, meat-heavy dishes, I wanted to make sure that there was still a seat at the table for anyone who didn't eat meat anymore. And at the same time, share that there's so much more than just those dishes. And you'll notice a lot of the dishes in there, you'll say like, I've never seen that. That's not a classic Jewish dish necessarily, but like Silas said when he was introducing it, I want this book to be used on a Tuesday. So I was looking at ingredients that were Jewish-ish, inspired by the diaspora, and how can we use those dishes any day of the week so you don't feel like you are only eating something Jewish on a Friday for Shabbat or for Passover, but you can have it on a Tuesday or Wednesday because you're enjoying one of these dishes that lend itself well to a weekday lunch or dinner. So I don't know if I even answered your question.
You absolutely did answer that question. Don't worry, I'll bring it back.
Thank you.
Well, so we're talking about flavors. We've talked a little bit about how our history impacts our ingredients and our cooking techniques. And I'm wondering, for you, how would you define modern Jewish cuisine?
This is one of my favorite questions because nobody knows what it actually means. And I mean, I think we all interpret it the way that we want to, but modern Jewish cuisine respects the traditions and the stories that where Jewish food comes from, but then looks at modern day ingredients and cooking methods. We have a whole host of things that our grandparents never had. The ability for us to be able to get specialty ingredients in a Wegmans is so different than our grandparents or great-grandparents looking for specific ingredients or spices, oils, syrups, and anything really. It's in a modern day, the food that we eat is changing, and to be able to respect the traditions and the traditional dishes while also putting a spin on them to make sure that they last for the next generations and grow with us as people and palates. I think that that's where modern Jewish cuisine lies and what it means, at least to me. And thinking about my little baby, I have a 4-month-old in the corner with my husband.
What note?
Thinking about him, he's not alone. Thinking about how I want him to have a Jewish upbringing and hopefully feel Jewish when he's older, because that's important to me. How can I make it so that it grows with him and grows with his generation so that he continues to want to eat Jewishly, whatever that means to him. I mean, it's going to be easy because I'll make all of his food, but he's at quite the advantage. So, but maybe his friends. Yeah.
You know, and that's how we're going to safeguard the traditions. This is how we're going to continue those traditions and those food memories forward. That's fabulous. I have 3 little boys myself, and they live on a steady diet of linses because that's my favorite, and kugel, and then occasionally I stick a salad in there. So maybe you need to come to my house and actually show them what Jewish cooking looks like from a plant-based position, because they don't believe me.
You know,
They need the expert.
I keep saying, because obviously you don't have to be vegetarian to eat vegetarian food. So I say to people who are vegetarian, like, this is the book you've been waiting for, and those who eat meat, this is a fantastic book of side dishes for you. So it can be their side dishes. It's for everyone.
I love it. I mean, and this next question kind of touches upon what we think of as traditional Jewish comfort foods. I know today at lunch I had a thick pastrami sandwich. I loved it. But we think of pastrami, we think of matzo ball soup, we think of kugels, we think of these things that are, you know, they're delicious. But I want to know, when you were going through the book and in recipe development and in that sort of writing, what did you find the most challenging in reimagining these really classic Jewish comfort foods?
So the most challenging one was making a vegan matzo ball. I have a recipe for a vegan and my classic egg-based matzo ball. And you have to have both. And the vegan ones, I tried about 25 different times to make them. Manischewitz should have sponsored me. I cleared out all of the stock in the Bay Area. I spent so much money on matzah meal. It was actually alarming, and I didn't want to waste anything. So even all of the recipes that I wasn't fully happy with, we still ate. So I really felt sick for a long time making these vegan matzah balls. And it was actually, my mom came to visit to help with some book things because it was cheaper to buy her a flight than it was to hire someone to help me clean the kitchen every day, so she stayed with us for 10 days. And it was a beautiful time for us to bond, obviously. And I just remember when I had the idea to steam the matzo ball, and we did, and it worked, and we just sat on the floor crying. Because we were A, so excited that we cracked the code, but also B, we were so sick of eating this like weird matzo ball sludge every day for lunch. It was like we were eating gruel, we were Oliver Twist, and being like, no, it was so bad. So I'd say the matzo ball was the most challenging for that reason, because if you've ever tried to make an egg-free matzo ball, they just disintegrate into nothingness, and it's so sad. But I will say, with many of the Passover dishes, or Passover-ish dishes, depending on what you eat during Passover, if you celebrate, they're either for you or just for any other day of the year. So that matzo ball does have some chickpea flour, so if you don't eat beans because you don't have a Sephardic husband, I'm sorry.
Well, I have a very important question, and this is an age-old question in my house. Do you make floater or sinkers?
If I'm making with egg, it's a floater. If it's a vegan one, they're a mix. I'm not gonna lie, to make a floater vegan matzo ball, I think you have to be a mad scientist. I think it's impossible. You have to like inject it with aerosol.
I love it. It's a constant struggle in my house. My mother-in-law likes the sinkers. I like the floaters.
I think all mother-in-laws like the sinkers.
I think so. It's like,
mother-in-law thing.
so when does it happen to us?
I hope I'm never like.
Sorry, I laughed very loudly with a mic. I'm sorry. All right.
I hope I never turn into her.
Oh gosh. So I've learned a lot from my mother-in-law, and one of the things I haven't necessarily learned, because we're Ashkenazi. I'm Ashkenazi on both sides of my family, Ashkenazi on both sides of my husband's family. I don't have many recipes that really span the spectrum, and I noticed in NOSH that your recipes really do have roots in Africa and India, the Middle East, as well as the Ashkenazi culture in Western and Eastern Europe. Why did you place so much emphasis on addressing all the history, all the flavor notes?
I think it's so important for I'll say us because I'm referring to myself, us as Jews and other people who are not Jewish, to recognize that Jewish people are not all from Eastern Europe. And I think it's so important to honor Jews from other cultures. And I think that there's the word Ashkenormative, there's that term of where that's what everyone assumes a Jew in North America is, and it's not accurate. And so having those options and recipes in the book was so important, because I didn't want it to be just about one particular sect of Jewish food, and I want to respect the other cultures that are within Judaism and other locations and other food ways and ingredients and methods. I think it's so important to show a more holistic view of Jewish food. And I mean, I started with a list of over 300 recipes I wanted in the book, but publishers don't like that. They tell you to choose 100 if you're lucky. And so I had to really cull it down, and I wanted to make sure that those different places were represented just as much as the dishes that North American Jews might be more familiar with as well, like we might find in the deli. So I think it's important to be inclusive, especially in a niche book, because we're already excluding all these other ingredients. I want to open it up to as many as I can.
And you most certainly did. I mean, I tried a few recipes already. You can see my Post-it notes. When I was going through the recipes to figure out what I wanted to make, having just come back from Israel over the summer and having my mind blown open by the diversity of ingredients and flavors, to see it replicated in your voice in this book was so wonderful, because I could now bring that new style, that new global influence to my family. So very, very interesting and very, very delicious. Now I'm going to jump to sort of, if you can't see, I've made categories. I'm hyper organized. It's ridiculous. And then I met my cohort here who took out the highlighter, so I knew we were going to be besties. But I kind of want to talk about modern Judaism and dietary restrictions. And this would be a very hot topic, because Sometimes we don't adhere to other elements of the religion because the dietary elements are a little bit intimidating or they're falling out of favor. But it's having a resurgence. And what I want to know is, what would you say from an eco-conscious point of view? Because really, when we're talking about kosher meals, we are talking about a balance. We're not eating meat heavy all the time because we can't mix it with every meal if we want to enjoy dairy. You know, we're not really taking over the supply of one element of our diet. I would like to know what you would advise young eco-conscious Jews who may not necessarily be all in on the religion, to encourage them to continue the weekly tradition of celebrating Shabbat, but also bringing that mentality into their everyday meals. Two-part question, sorry.
I know, let me digest it for a second. So when it comes to like anyone who's looking for eco-conscious or eco-friendly, I guess, recipes, eating one less meat meal a week is great. You can start by eating one less meat meal at lunch, and that's awesome. You don't have to be a vegetarian, you don't have to go all in by any means. Just reducing it in general is a good thing. And there's the concept of tikkun olam, where we're repairing the world, and some can extrapolate that to say that we're trying to be more kind to the world and kinder to animals and whatnot. And I think that that's a big point of why vegetarianism and Judaism go well together, even though a lot of the foods are very meat heavy. And then the part about maybe younger Jews who don't necessarily feel connected to the religion but still want to do things around it. This is my target market. This is who I was thinking about when I wrote the book as well, because I was trying to infuse Jewish culture and Jewish things and Jewish ingredients into everyday recipes. So if you're a Jew who doesn't really feel like that connected, that's okay. It's however you choose to be Jewish is your choice. I'm not your mother. So, but if you want to feel a little bit more Jewish and maybe have a salad with tahini dressing on Friday, that's great. Try that and see how you feel. And I have a little Shabbat matrix in here as well, because I really believe that the less barriers we have to entry into feeling Jewish or Jewish enough is a good thing. So I have my little Shabbat matrix of like low effort, low time, like literally have pizza and wine, and that's your bread and your wine and light a tea light, and start there. And then if you like that, that's awesome. Then keep going. Try something new. Maybe have challah the next week, or like don't have pizza and have a loaf of bread. That's however you choose to practice is up to you. And if you're not Jewish and you want to learn about it, then this is a good entry point for you too. And I think that just removing these barriers to entry and just making it a little easier for people, especially these days, is a positive thing. So I'm relaxed. I'm a cool Jewish mom.
I love that mentality, because I've been accidentally doing that at home several times. Don't tell my mother-in-law. We had rye bread. We didn't have challah. It's okay. It didn't rise. It didn't work. So yes, thank you for that permission.
and it doesn't even have to be anything bigger. Every Friday, my husband and I share 5 things that we were grateful for that week, and that's kind of our little meditation together. And so we've been traveling for 4.5 weeks now with our baby, so Friday nights are not very fun at this time. And we always make sure we have time to say what we're grateful for from that week, and that's our little point of reflection where we can take a pause, and that's our Shabbat right now, because we're traveling with a 4-month-old. Brave and crazy.
They're doing it phenomenally well. That baby is glorious. I went to pinch his cheeks. So Shabbat, I like that as a breather almost, going into the weekend, and whatever way you can, and what you feel comfortable with, and certainly with recipes from this book. I want to jump to some other holidays, and how is food integral to such holidays as Hanukkah or Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year? Do you have a recipe in this book that you can think of that would help to really spark that inspiration for the holidays, similar to what you just spoke about with Shabbat, about the practice of?
Yeah, so I do have suggested menus for the heavy hitter holidays in here. Of course, Passover is coming up, and at least in my family, the holidays is when we would do Jewish stuff, and it was mostly because we had a special dinner, and that's what we would do. And so with Passover coming up, we already spoke about the matzo balls. And the gefilte fish, we're actually being very Passover heavy with this.
We're being good.
Yeah, we're timely.
As my mother would say, good Jewish girls.
Yeah. Sorry, I can't laugh too hard. And so much of the enjoyment of the holiday is based around, at least in my experience, around a holiday table and through what we're eating, and it's all coming out of food memories and these memories that we make by eating together. And so the recipes in the book, and the menus are really inspired by my food memories growing up. So when it comes to Passover, and again, I eat beans on Passover. I'm going to preface that. I eat the beans. Because my husband eats the beans, and we eat the beans together. So it's
many
easy.
bad jokes in my mind right now.
I just need to preface it because I know someone's going to be like, you can't eat beans, and I need to tell them that I do. And I'm afraid of the people telling me about Passover. And so for me, growing up, we always had brisket during Passover, and that was the main event of our Passover meal. And so I have in here a recipe for a savory pulled mushroom and tofu brisket that's very much inspired by the memory of eating my grandmother's brisket, and the marinade is inspired by the one that she would make. If anyone's familiar with Noreen Gillet's and the Pleasures of Your Food Processor, it's loosely based on Queen Noreen, the best. It's not even a Jewish cookbook, but for me it's the Bible of Jewish food, because that's what I grew up with. I know you. Yeah, you're getting it.
I grew up with her.
Yeah, Noreen Gillet's knows what's up. And so that brisket is so special to me for Passover, because that's what reminds me of sitting around the table with my family, where there were card tables on card tables on card tables to get everyone in the neighborhood essentially a spot at dinner. So that's one of the big ones for me. And then there is a buckwheat honey cake that, when you said the high holidays, that's the first thing that comes to mind, because we'd always have a honey cake made out of buckwheat honey. So it almost tastes like a mix of molasses and honey, and it's a little hard to find. I feel like this is one recipe that I just put there for me, honestly. But it's very good, but it has whiskey and some grated carrots, buckwheat flour, and buckwheat honey, and that just reminds me of my mom's honey cake. That was her mom's and her mom's honey cake. And so those dishes are still most definitely in there, but just a little bit of more modern ingredients and tastes.
I love that. I'm with you on the buckwheat honey. I was able to find some in Canada. You can find it at Whole Foods here. You gotta look, where you can ask them to order it. So, also in your book, because you spoke about menus, it doesn't, but now they can hear me. Hello. All right. You talked about menus. You talked about the sort of tips and tricks. I'm curious about the glossary. And in there, you have a diverse range of different dishes. But I'm wondering why a modern cook should spend the time learning about cholent, or why we should know particularly the history of cholent, and why we should go back and learn the meaning behind sadek. The traditional dishes from all over our Jewish world. How are you going to present it in a way that entices the reader to come and really explore our food tradition?
So I think having a glossary demystifies a lot of the dishes. So when we think of cholent, it's a slow stew that's typically made Friday and then it's cooked overnight so you can eat it on Saturday and you don't have to do any work, so it's Shabbat friendly. My cholent uses tempeh and it's cooked in like under 4 hours. It's very quick for a cholent. But knowing that a cholent is essentially a slow cooked stew, I think demystifies it a lot, and it takes a dish that one might traditionally lump in with less exciting food and shows that it's literally just stew. It's a tempeh stew, and that's pretty much the root of it. So it brings it into a more modern light, but these dishes are so important because they tell the story of how people would observe Shabbat when they don't have a slow cooker, or if someone was 100% observing Shabbat and not on their smartphones, or using an Instapot or an air fryer on Friday nights, or they didn't have microwaves. I think it's important to know where it came from and then have an alternative that fits in with anyone's lifestyle, because not everyone has the time to cook a full Friday night meal on a Friday because we're at work. And we have kids who go to soccer practice or any sort of thing on a Saturday, and so maybe we're not phone free on Saturdays. And so I think being able to respect where things have come from is, so in that glossary is so important, so then we can look at how can we still fit it in our lives. And at the same time, I think that the glossary was so important to me to have in there. I know my editor was like, why do you have so many things in there? But this book isn't just for Jewish people. Just like how I buy vegetarian Indian cookbooks, vegetarian Korean cookbooks, this is just another ethnic cuisine. And I want anyone to feel comfortable flipping through the book, and if they don't know what a word means, they can go learn what it is, because if you didn't grow up with these foods, some of the names would be really confusing to you. And I get that. So having that and a little glossary at the front was important, because I want it to be as reader-friendly as possible, but also as approachable as possible, no matter if you're Jewish, have never met a Jewish person, and just like the pictures. It's for anyone.
That's such a valuable point, especially in these very fraught times, that our food traditions can be a conversation starter with others who may not be familiar, who others may have prejudged our traditions and cultures. So I really appreciate that answer, and it's making me view actually NOSH in a different light as an ambassador. I could, not everyone lives in a big city where we have a large Jewish population, so if we can get more books and more people like you in front of bigger audiences, could be better. All right, Mike, let's behave. So I want to kind of circle back to your personal beliefs, your personal sort of embracement of Judaism, and knowing that you put such emphasis on cooking and eating in a healthy and plant-based way, has that impacted your Jewish beliefs? Has it made it stronger? Has it changed it? Has it given it more nuance? Because Tikei Olam, as you mentioned, it's many different things to many different people.
The short answer is not really. I think that, so I became a dietitian after going to culinary school. I decided to become a dietitian. I was working in Toronto for a while, and I just think that so much of that shaped my approach to food. And I will say that there's a lot of nutritious recipes in the book, for sure, but there's also 2 donuts and lots of cookies, and so not everything is healthy. So if you're looking for a healthy food book, then just skip the last chapter. For sure skip it, because there's nothing besides heartwarming. There's nothing heart healthy about it. So, but I think just understanding that the food that I want to eat on a regular basis could still fit into my culture and my beliefs was how it fit in, and again with the ingredients that are more common in the diaspora, that's really how I focus a lot of the recipes. So that includes things like pomegranate molasses, dates, halva, tahini, and some of the spice blends and combinations. I think that that's really where a lot of my connection to Jewish food comes from, and it makes it feasible for me to eat it any day of the week while still feeling good about it. And of course I had to test all the recipes, and we had to eat all the recipes, so I wanted to make sure that we also felt good after eating the food. And I mean, there's still 2 vodka recipes in there that are fully fried. I'm not air frying anything when it comes to the holidays. So I think that short answer is no. Well, if I can pull it a little, kinda, I don't know.
This is about conversation. This is about learning more, and I love it. I'm with you on this. I have one last question before we go to our Q&A. So if you have your books, if you have your questions ready, if you don't have your questions ready, you have about 3 minutes until you need to. What would you most like readers to take away from NOSH, and where can they order your amazing, wonderful, glorious Jewish plant-based cookbook?
Well, you get it here at Brookline Booksmith. That's my first easy answer. And I hope that people take away from NOSH that there's no such thing as being, if you're Jewish, a good or bad Jew when it comes to food. Just eat things that make you feel good and that bring you memories, bring up memories of your family and your culture and your heritage. I think that's the most important thing. And if you aren't Jewish, then I think trying this as a new cuisine is such a fun way for you to explore such a rich culture and heritage and diverse group of people, and a way to connect with your community. And I also hope that people get from it that you don't have to be vegetarian. You can literally do whatever you want because you're an adult. And being an adult you can make that choice for yourself. And like I said, this is great for side dishes or trying something new during the week, or it's a great way to include people who don't eat meat at your holiday table. And if you're having a vegetarian at your Passover Seder this year, or even at Easter, and you're like, what am I supposed to make them? Make them something from here. And include everyone from your holiday, from your family and a group of friends and whatnot into your home for your holidays. And they'll appreciate having something other than an iceberg lettuce salad and mashed potatoes. Because I know I would have.
I love this book. Thank you for this conversation. It sits next to my grandmother's little recipe books, the scraps of recipes cut from paper and from the Hadassah cookbooks. It's beautiful. I hope you enjoy it as much as I have. And we are going to start our question and answer session. So questions. Don't be shy. I'm never shy. Yes.
Hi, nice to meet you in person. You know, when I learned to cook was with my grandmother and my great aunt. They didn't have any cookbooks whatsoever, and you know, so part of what I try to do is by cooking is to bring them with me, right, for my family. But how did you, like, your ideas for your recipes? Did they come from your past, and how did you bring them forward? You know, how did you, I missed the first 20 minutes because I was cooking dinner for the family. You know, I wanted to know, like, how did you, you know, come up with them to bring them along? Because my grandmother didn't have any cookbooks whatsoever.
That's a great question. So I mentioned The Pleasures of Your Food Processor, Noreen Gillett's, God rest her soul. And so that was really the one cookbook that my grandmother used, and she wrote so much in the margins like yours. She cooked out things from the newspaper, printed things off, and when she passed, that was the one thing that was flagged for me. And so I inherited that cookbook. And so when I was first starting to think of some of the recipes, the first thing I did was I went to that cookbook and I looked at the ones that were the dirtiest pages. And I also looked back on my memories growing up about the foods that we ate at holidays, and just made this long list of all these foods that made me think of my Jewish upbringing and the people around me and my grandmothers, mostly my one, and then the mandelbread, and a lot on all of those stories. And I was very fortunate. My parents were very big travelers, and they spent some time living on a kibbutz, and my mom worked in the kitchen, so a lot of the food that I ate growing up was a little different to my friends' families. We ate a lot of, my after-school snack every day was olives and feta cheese, and because that's what we always had in the house. And so I really just looked back on memories and talked to my mom and talked to my aunts and uncles, and said, like, what were the dishes that make you think of family? And they were typically the same ones that I thought of, but that's where I started for those foods. And then at the same time, like my parents, I have a love of travel. My husband and I travel quite a bit, and we always make a point of taking cooking classes and visiting synagogues and Jewish things in cities. And so I started to look at our travels and our experience and how did that shape the holidays that we have in our nuclear family, and also drew inspiration from those.
Thank you.
This is, first of all, so wonderful. I'm so excited to start cooking for this book. So you've been talking a lot about traditions, and I think that's so important because so much of our culture comes from there. But I was wondering, like, to what extent have you balanced, like, creating new traditions and exploits? Have you thought about, like, what you want to bring to that next generation, especially as you brought a new kid into the world? Like, what new traditions are you hoping to start surrounding Jewish food?
I love that question. So when it comes to traditions and ones that I want to start, I think so many of the traditions when it comes to Jewish food that I think of, the main one is just that I was in the kitchen all the time with my family, and I was getting my hands dirty, and they were making me taste raw dough and raw gefilte fish so that I could learn. And seeing my grandmother and my mom in the kitchen together, working together, that's the basis of my traditions growing up in our Jewish household. So I think once this little guy is, I mean, he's horizontally sleeping right now, but once he's mobile and can do things, I hope that the tradition that we have together is just cooking. And cooking challah together and getting him involved in the kitchen and excited about holidays and celebrating our culture together. And I think that just getting him in the kitchen in any capacity, even if it's on, like I said, a Tuesday to help chop a vegetable for one of the salads, I think that that's a great way for us to build those traditions, because in my life and in my family, it all starts around the dinner table or the kitchen island, so I hope that I can do that for him as well.
Whether it was you or your publishers, how did you land on the title NOSH, and what does that word mean to you?
So I will say it was mostly them, the publishers. So my blog is called NOSH with Micah, so they, I think, thought it would be like easy to reference NOSH and Micah together. But NOSH means like to have a little snack, to eat a little something, and it's just food that you want to eat all the time and can't stop eating. And that's kind of the basis of NOSH, so hopefully these are just foods that you want to eat all the time and can't stop eating. And I will say finding a title is really hard. And so they really liked this one. And I really liked the subtitle. So that's easier.
How long did it take to write the book? And also I'm interested about recipe testers. Do you test them all yourself? Do you use volunteer testers? Do you pay testers? Like, how does that,
That's
your
a great question. So the process of writing the book, I was able to do it on a faster timeline because I did all the photography, so I could do it as I went, and I was taking photos as I went. So every time I tested a recipe, which we'll get to testing, I was able to take the photos if it was for the book, so I had a whole host of photos that I could use at the end of it. Professionally, I also do food photography, so this wasn't like willy-nilly on my phone camera, oh my goodness, on my phone. And as an author, you're typically the one who's responsible for paying for a food photographer, and working as a food photographer, I know that I couldn't afford to hire myself. So we have to make some concessions. And so the timeline was I signed papers in September 2022. Thank you, husband. Thanks, Josh. So September 2022, and I was really adamant that I wanted it to come out for Passover of this year, because there's a whole host of new vegetarian and vegan cookbooks coming out, and I wanted to ride that wave. So from September 2022 to now, that's 18 months. So which is very quick for a cookbook. And then when it came to testing, I tested every recipe at least 3 times, being happy with it. And then I had my little army of 60 testers who were volunteer testers and were able to identify themselves as beginner or intermediate cooks, or I have friends in the food world, so professional cooks. So I would farm out all of the recipes to be tested. They'd give me feedback. I would retest it based on their feedback and send it out to my highly selected testers, my favorite testers. Then we'd go back and forth with feedback. Sometimes it meant that I started over. Sometimes it meant that it it usually was that the desserts weren't sweet enough because I don't have a huge sweet tooth. And so it was a long process of testing, about 2 to 3 months of going back and forth with these 60 testers. So each tester tested 1 to 2-ish recipes, and then a handful of them tested more. And I'm just very grateful that I have a really great community online, honestly, and people who are really willing to provide honest and open feedback, even though sometimes it didn't feel good. So that's how they were all tested. Some authors have the budget to have professional recipe testers, but at the same time, this book isn't made for professionals, it's made for people at home, and so I wanted to make sure that somebody who could cook maybe eggs was also going to find success with the recipes, and I felt like that was important for the clarity of instructions and how easy it is to find ingredients and everything in between, so that I really appreciated having community testers helping me out with it. Very grateful for them.
Why did you decide to become a vegetarian? Was it a particular reason?
So honestly, like most good Jewish girls, I had gut problems, and nobody knew what to do with me. So we were like, what if I thought, like, what if I went vegetarian? And I did. And I just really preferred being vegetarian. So it came fully out of an Ashkenazi stomach. I'm not gonna lie. And of course it's evolved since then, but that was the impetus of me going vegetarian.
Can I ask a second?
Yeah.
Is your husband vegetarian?
He is.
You want to raise your son vegetarian?
My husband is vegetarian. We're gonna see what my little guy wants to do. I am his mother, but I'll give him that choice.
Oh, yes.
Were all of your testers vegetarians?
No, they were not. I didn't ask for vegetarian testers, so I want meat lovers to love it too.
Are there any recipes in your book that are not kid or teen friendly, but friendly enough that a teen or a kid could take it upon themselves to actually do the recipe on their own?
Yeah, I would say so. I'd say depending on how confident and comfortable the teen is, there's definitely some. One that I think teens would probably love is my smashed cucumber dill salad. It's inspired by my Zeta's pickles, and it's also inspired by my love for Asian smashed cucumber salads. So they can there's some cutting, but most of it's smashing with the end of a spatula, which I feel like would be great for teenagers. Supervised, yeah. Aggressive smashing.
Any other questions? Yes.
So you probably didn't grow up on Indian food, but yet there's a whole Jewish culture of Indian food, and it's included in your book.
So it's more like some of the spices that you might find in some of those dishes. Yeah, saffron. If there's ever a long ingredient list, it's because there's a whole lot of spices going on in there. So that's pretty much where that comes from.
Any more? Going once, twice, thrice. Thank you all so